Faculty, students, and staff here at SUNYIT, I welcome all of you to the third installment of President's Lecture Series. Today we are very fortunate to have one of our own. I hope we can call him one of our own because he has received honorary doctorate from State University of New York Institute of Technology back in 2005. Dr. John Zogby of JZ Analytics now, but as you know that he has started his career with John Zogby International, major influencer in politics and basically almost every issue that we ever care to talk about in our community. But Dr. Zogby is also a Lemoyne College grad and also has degrees from Syracuse University. True New Yorker. I believe he is from Oriskany Falls. Utica, okay. All right. For some reason I thought he had ties to Oriskany Falls. Okay. So, but he is a Utica native, and we are very fortunate to have him speak to us today. And today's topic is the political and polling landscape in an era of tectonic change. Now, as a scientist, when I see things like tectonic, I get a little worried. But I'm really excited to hear Dr. Zogby's lecture today, and I welcome all of you to President's Lecture Series. So with that, Dr. John Zogby of Utica.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How nice. Thanks for that intro. Be like Queen Elizabeth here. There you go. Get that down. And there's a different venue every time I come back here to speak. Wow. Corey and Ron, we remember something a tad different, don't we, in the mid-'70s. So why don't I just get right into this? The tectonic change part, obviously, is all about technology and all about the fast pace of everything, which just requires us to be flexible and nimble in terms of our methodologies. I go back to the days in my old call center. I started in September of 1984, and I actually recall the days when people would answer the phone in 84 and 85, and the next thing you'd hear is, shh, I have a long-distance call. Somebody is asking me questions. This is important. We had 65% response rates. Every 3 people we got on the phone, 2 gladly did the survey. Sporadically, there were answering machines. There was no call waiting. There was no screening of calls, none of that. And so it was just so completely different. Socially, it was completely different when we started. It was not uncommon to reach at home a woman of a certain age, late 40s or 50s or 60s, who would say, "Oh no, you don't want to talk to me. You have to wait until my husband comes home." Now think about that. Number one, the demure woman. And number two, think about this, because this is serious. Telling a total stranger, "Hey, I'm home all alone." So things have changed dramatically. I'm going to get into that in the second half of what I'm talking about today. The first half is I want to talk about the election and the fact that not only another very competitive election right until the last minute, but also demographically a very historic election. And I want to just outline for you what those demographic trends are and how they impact the political landscape. So let's go back to 2008 with Senator Obama running against Senator McCain. And understand that when Barack Obama won the presidency, he won because he was able to put together a victorious coalition, a demographic coalition, that was just as important historically as Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal coalition in 1932 and Ronald Reagan's Reagan Democrat coalition in 1980. When Roosevelt won in 1932, that New Deal coalition was this melange, and that's our SUNY word for the day, of working class ethnics, liberal intellectuals, Southern racist farmers, for the first time a turn away from Republican to Democrat among African Americans. It was really an eclectic group. And the New Deal coalition lasted solidly for approximately 2 generations. In 1980, when Ronald Reagan won the presidency, you now had the children, grandchildren of New Dealers living in suburbs, more traditional in values, less dependent on government largesse, a tad more prosperous. And we had the phenomenon of Reagan Democrats and a burgeoning conservative movement. And Ronald Reagan's victory coalition lasted solidly approximately 2 generations. When Barack Obama runs and wins, this is a far different America in 2008. And so the issue in 2012 would be, would he or would he not hold together that demographic coalition? And in fact, will it last another 2 generations? And so what was that victory coalition? Mainly 4 demographic groups, each of whom were voting with a sense of historical destiny. So first we have Latino voters. This is a huge change. Listen to this. I'm not showing off. Maybe just a little bit, but this is what I do. In 1992, Latinos were 4% of 92 million voters in the presidential election, 5% of 95 million voters in 1996, 6% of 105 million voters in 2000, 8.2% of 122 million voters in 2004, 9.2% of 133 million voters in 2008. That trend, you have a larger electorate and just a 45-degree angle growth in the piece of the pie that's Latino. The fact that Barack Obama in 2008 got 67% of the Latino vote was very, very significant. Why? Because they're growing and they were strategically located in key battleground states. So issue number 1, was he or was he not going to hold on to that Latino vote, and would it increase its percentage of the pie? And so 2012, we got our answer. While there had been, as there would be among a lot of groups, a year and a half before the election, profound disappointment in President Obama, the fact is that by election time, Latino turnout was now officially 10% of the total turnout. And President Obama actually was validated by 71% of Latinos. This is a huge problem for the GOP. A huge problem. And in fact, a lot of that vote came not only as a validation of Barack Obama and his agenda, but as also a repudiation of the GOP, its conservative politics, probably most importantly, its position on immigration reform. That's Latinos. Number two, African Americans. Now, African Americans are not a growing portion of our population. They are a growing portion of our electorate, however, and that's very significant. So in a typical nationwide election, African Americans are usually about 10% of the total vote. In 2008, in voting for Senator Obama, African Americans were 12.9% of the total. And given the fact that he received 95%, as opposed to the usual average of 90%, that meant every African American voter pretty much was voting Democrat. Not pretty much, very much voting Democrat. Every increase in the African American vote, every mini slice of the total pie was going into Senator Obama's column. In 2012, yes, there in fact had been some disappointment. There still is. At 4 o'clock, I will have a conference call with the Robert L. Johnson people, the founders of Ebony and Jet. They are profoundly disappointed in President Obama, but I've just completed a large African American survey that shows a real duality among that voting group. But the bottom line is, this time, in 2012, the percentage of turnout of African Americans was 13.1% of the total. Barack Obama got 93%. And so African Americans were a solid piece of that Obama coalition, demographic coalition. Number three, this was the one that was creating some problems for the president and for pollsters. And that was young people. We categorize 18 to 29-year-olds normally, but 18 to 29-year-olds fit into that group of people that were born between 1979 and now 1994. Others call them millennials, so do I. I call them first globals. These are America's first global citizens. 66% of people within that age group have passports and have traveled abroad. They are the least likely of any group to say that American culture is inherently superior. They have a planetary sensibility like no other. Whether they've traveled or not traveled, they have a global mentality. As high as 44%, but then since the recession, back down to 29%. Say of this age group, I expect, not hope or wish, I expect to live and work in a foreign capital at some point in my life. These are true first globals. And there was a whole debate in 2008. Is Senator Obama a baby boomer, born in 1961? Or is he Generation X? The reality was that 18 to 29-year-olds were voting for one of their own, a first global. That was his history. That's what he looked like. We did a poll with Hamilton College. We actually did a series of polls for Hamilton College, but this one poll that we did At the end of the fall semester, early December of 2004, very significant, early December 2004, we asked open-ended to the 1,000 18 to 24-year-olds that we polled, what will America look like 20 years from now? The number one response was Barack Obama. Now here's a guy who had only sprung on the scene 4 months earlier. Why? Also open-ended, because he looks like us. And the fact of the matter is, when you stop and think about this, I'm a baby boomer. 81% of my age cohort is white. My sons are 29 to 34. They're sort of right in between, but mainly on the global side. 61% of their age cohort is white. And now, truly, the highest point of my life and the favorite part of this talk that I give is my grandchild is due in 2 weeks. And she will be born into an age cohort that's 48% white. So we're talking about a huge demographic change, but back to this group. They voted for Obama. We never know, or we've never known in the past, how 18 to 29-year-olds would vote. If you look at the history, they're generally split, and they go back and forth, Democrat, Republican, but 66% of this group voted for Senator Obama. And typically, 18 to 29-year-olds, I'm sorry for all the numbers, but this is what I do. Typically, 18 to 29-year-olds are 17% of the total vote. In 2008, they were 19% of the total vote and gave 2/3 of their vote to Obama. But now, what was going to happen in 2012? And that was the part that made this really interesting. It's kind of unpredictable. Because what I saw happening in 2012 wasn't simply disappointment. What I saw happening was also a small but growing phenomenon among this age group that I was calling CENGA, C-E-N-G-A, college educated not going anywhere. A recession, a 4-year recession is tough, but when it's your entire adult life, it's very tough. And when there's no sign of respite, no outlook toward the future, when you don't see government as a solution, when you got one president and the president gets the credit and gets the blame, that's problematic. So the polls were a little nutty. Sometimes this group that gave the Senator Obama 66% of the vote was giving him a 45% approval rating. Or 45% said that they were going to vote for him. And then it would jump up or jump down. I'll tell you, it jumped up when during the Republican debates. Best thing that ever happened, sorry for what appears to be partisan, but the best thing that ever happened to Democrats, that's not even a value judgment, was Senator Santorum talking about contraception. Huh? So now the issue was going to be not so much whether or not Obama was going to win the bigger share of 18 to 29-year-olds. How many of them were going to bother to vote? And that's the thing that we were tracking right down to the last minute. Because ultimately, there was a little boomlet for Romney among younger voters when he chose Paul Ryan, because CENGAs have this kind of libertarian sensibility. I don't trust anybody at all, anytime, except Ron Paul. And that kind of rhymes, come to think of it. Let me write that down. It's just, just had a moment here. But by and large, the GOP was not able to take advantage because younger people in growing numbers are more and more libertarian. But libertarian has two sides to it: social and cultural libertarian, and don't tread on me, government libertarian. And ultimately, what put Barack Obama over the top, you know, in the election, no suspense here. He won, he got a smaller share, he got 61% of 18 to 29-year-olds this time. But what put him over the top in many instances was the fact that young women turned out to vote, and 71% of 18 to 29-year-old women voted for President Obama. The fourth group. Fourth group is really a name I think everybody should know. Richard Florida. Anybody familiar with that name? The rise of the creative class. Okay, so you and I are just going to talk then. The rise of the creative class, the flight of the creative class, very important, seminal thinker globally. Richard Florida has identified this group, the creative class, generally speaking, in 2008, 35 million strong. These are people who work in the broad area of the knowledge sector, but that is so broad, that means the traditional professions, you know, doctor, lawyer, teacher, but also means people who work in technology, in healthcare, in entertainment, in media. What's important about this group, first of all, is that Barack Obama got 61% of the creative class in 2008. And what was especially important wasn't just that it was 61%, but it's where you have the most important clusters of creative class voters. So let's just sort of survey across the country and picture the US map. Boston area, Route 128, north into southern New Hampshire. Northern Virginia. Raleigh-Durham, Research Triangle, Charlotte, North Carolina. Southern Florida. Santa Fe, New Mexico. Des Moines, Ames, Iowa. What am I getting at here? Anybody following? Urban, these are the battleground states. And those battleground states went from red, George W. Bush, to blue, Senator Obama, Barack Obama in 2008. Now, I can tell you, because I was tracking them daily, that we did not know how this creative class was going to vote. It was nowhere near 61% through most of the election cycle. That's one of the reasons why, when we were particularly focusing on those 12 battleground states, some of which I just mentioned, those were razor thin. 48, 48, 45, 43, 49, 48. Those are the numbers I was looking at every single day. And then towards the end, Obama ultimately won about 54, 55% of the creative class nationwide, but most importantly, he won every single one of those battleground states. I came out with a piece in Forbes the Saturday before the election, and the first 5 paragraphs were the disclaimer that I wasn't predicting anything, because I have this habit that I like to still be in business the Wednesday after an election, you know. But the title of it was, "So What If It Isn't Close After All?" And my point was that that popular vote was going to stay fairly close. But what if Obama won those battleground states all by 1 or 2 percentages, which he did? He won every single one of them, and aside from Ohio, frankly, none of them were runaways. but he won every single battleground state. So bottom line here is that Obama put together his coalition in 2008. He validated that coalition, or that coalition validated him, particularly Hispanics, African Americans, young people, most especially young women, and the creative class. The other factor here that was predictable, I crunched some numbers, and in fact, I did them on a yellow legal pad with a pen and a calculator. It's really very low tech. But I was looking at white versus non-white. And clearly, when John McCain and Barack Obama ran against each other in 2008, John McCain got 57% of the white vote. But the white vote was 74% of the total. My models were showing me that the white vote was going to be about 71%, 3 points lower, and that at no time prior to the election until the last minute did I see Mitt Romney matching the 57% figure. And remember, even then, with McCain getting 57% of the white vote, he still lost the election. Looking ahead into the future, voting and winning is like an influenza. Hispanics are having no trouble doing voter registration. African Americans, no trouble doing voter registration. The creative class will continue to be a swing vote, but not with the message the Republicans are giving, unless, and look, long term, I see this coalition lasting for 2 generations. Short term, elections still have to be won one at a time. And it depends on the issue, the personality, and whether or not the incumbent or the incumbent party is messing up. Right now, the Democratic Party is messing up. Its good fortune is that the GOP is messing up, I think, a whole lot more. I'm going to end that portion on this note. I'm going to answer any of your questions afterward. Let me just talk a little bit about the field that I'm in. It used to be so simple. You've maybe heard a lot about Gallup in the early 30s and in 1936, challenging what had been a mail-in survey of subscribers, the Literary Digest. But Gallup was doing face-to-face random probability samplings nationwide. Those random probability samplings done nationwide face-to-face became a problem in 1948 when everybody thought that Tom Dewey was going to win. Now the story is, not only that Harry Truman won, but that the polls were all wrong. But what we don't see too much of is that it took 3 to 5 weeks to do those polls back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. I remember them. Those polls had to be done, imagine, you had to you had to develop sampling points, you had to hire people in those sampling points, develop the questionnaire, mail the bulk packages, wait for the packages to come back, and then in addition to not enough telephone penetration, there were no PCs. There were those big, huge mainframe computers. And typical pollsters were using slide rules and getting one-dimensional results in their polling. That started to change, of course, in the late 50s and 1960s. And then the godsend was the telephone. Warren Matofsky, CBS, developing the notion that, hey, 95% of households have landlines. And this is easy. That's near universal. Very, very poor people who can't afford telephones, they're not going to vote anyway. We can get these done, and then we can use what we call the PC, the personal computer, to tabulate multidimensional, multivariate responses. It was wonderful, it was easy, and as long as people were cooperating on the telephone, it was fine. They were remarkably accurate, and above all, they were timely. So now you didn't do a poll 3 weeks before the election. You do it right on up to the last minute. And the polls were working. But what I'm talking about in the title of the, standing on every industry, we all are, including this wonderful industry right here, we are standing on tectonic plates that are moving in different directions, and those of us that are running a business and creating a vision and developing new ways and new approaches to doing our business, we've got to do it and be as nimble as we possibly can. So what's been happening? Number one, today, landline penetration is 62%. That is what landline penetration was in 1963. So that means when we conduct our polls, we now have to blend samples if we do it the traditional way. About 2/3 or so of our sample on the landline, 1/3 and growing by cell phone, by mobile phone. Okay, it takes so many more dials to reach someone on a mobile phone, and a mobile phone is not, let's say, survey friendly. Let's also add the fact that a typical poll is not, hi, how are you? My name is Lori, I'm doing a poll. Who are you going to vote for? Thank you, goodbye. A typical poll is 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 questions, and I'm telling you right now, I wouldn't answer that on my cell phone either. In fact, I have the proud distinction of telling you that I, in 1998, hung up on a Zogby poll. Because they called me at home at 10 minutes to 9. The young lady was very, very professional, and she was trained right. She said, hello, I'm doing a very brief poll for Zogby International, but I knew that the poll was 85 questions. I wasn't answering that for anything. So there you go. But I certainly wouldn't answer it on a cell phone. That's for sure. So the telephone, it's still necessary. We still have to use it. If we're doing polls that are private, confidential, and spontaneous, then you really have to use the telephone to do it. But other than that, since late 1998, 1999, we have been developing the online polling methodology. It's been not easy. It's been a challenge in terms of winning approval within our field for it. There are stubborn traditionalists. They're the ones who, if you think back to history, Christopher, come back. Don't sail across the water. Galileo, come down from the tower. The Pope, he's always right. This is going over like a lead balloon. But there are stubborn traditionalists in our fields. It's got to be landline, it's got to be mobile phone, and the reality is that today, online household penetration is about 83, 84%. It's 92% among likely voters. That's good enough. We also have the capacity to reach minorities. And in fact, just doing our comparisons over the last couple of years, the online polling methodology actually, I think in terms of what we call in the business coverage, the ability to get as broad and representative and random a sample as possible, is actually more accurate in terms of representativeness. But the other thing, and the final point, is that we poll overseas. We've done 80 countries. We've done stands you've never heard of. We've done Albania and got the elections right down to 0.1%. We've done Iran. We've actually did a poll in the Horn of Africa, Djibouti. How many have ever heard of Djibouti? Who is the leader of Djibouti? Sheikh Djibouti. No. Well, I thought you'd figured that one out. Right? Thank you. You liked that, didn't you? But we, those polls were done face-to-face. They were done the old-fashioned way. And I could sense, going back several years ago, that in areas like the Middle East and Latin America, Asia, that we were actually going to bypass the landline telephone. And we were going to jump somehow from face-to-face to online technology. And I'm really happy that what we've been able to do is actually do a hybrid in those countries, which is mobile to online. So you get a message now via text that here's a link to conduct a poll, and here's an option for you to go online and do the poll. Now, is it random probability sampling? Is it, in fact, that theory that states that everyone in the universe you're polling has the same chance of being selected as everyone else? And the short answer is no. But I don't know that that even exists or can exist anymore. I don't know that it can exist in countries that are 20, 30, 40, 50% illiterate. I don't know that it can exist in the United States when so many people just opt out of taking a survey. How can I legitimately say everybody has the same chance of being selected when I get a 6% response rate in metropolitan New York and metropolitan LA? 6, 7, 8% response rates on the telephone. That's why I say we're standing on tectonic plates, and flexibility and being nimble is so very important. I think that the accuracy of the work is there, but it also suggests just how much things have changed since, I have a long distance call. This is very important. And so that's it. That's pretty much everything I know. So thank you very much. And now let's mix it up. Let's open it up to questions. Thank you. Way back, Linda. Some of it. It works particularly well, with customers and when you're tracking sentiment. We don't do much of it. I prefer whatever it is we have left of random sample. But in terms of creating a panel and going back to people who responded a certain way, have a certain value system, going back to them, I think it's fine. However, you have to get the buy-in from them to be part of a long-term panel, because otherwise, suppose you have a panel of 1,000, you're going to be very, very lucky if you get half of them the second time around. But I think there's a legitimacy to it, and I certainly wouldn't rule it out.
What has been the impact of social media, Facebook, Twitter, and others, in the polling environment that you're in?
It's a real question. It's a whole new source of information about people. And so in some ways, we're running parallel. We're still providing that randomness and that science to public opinion. And we're measuring intensity levels as well in our public opinion surveys. But you really can't beat having the capacity, to get that very personal intensity verbatim via tweet or via Facebook or via other forms of social media. And so, in other words, if I'm doing customer satisfaction or crowdsourcing of some sort, to be able to get big data, to be able to get millions of responses and trying to figure out an algorithm. So, to measure the intensity level, to do what we call natural language diagnostics, plugging in keywords and seeing how many times those keywords come back. That stuff is very valuable, but it doesn't replace the random sampling survey research. And now, we've had arrangements over the years with Facebook to actually poll Facebook users and to measure tweets, but we can't misrepresent what we're doing. I can't survey Facebook and say, this is how America feels. No, this is how respondents to Facebook feel. But it's a whole area. Incidentally, that is, aside from selling my company and getting it back and working now for my son, we had in the process a name change. And that's why we are Zogby Analytics, to be able to show that in 40, almost half of our instances for client work, we don't really even have to do new survey research. We have so much that we have compiled over the last few decades that it's a question now of integrating some of that data into other sources of data or re-aggregating, just getting another look at that data and putting it into different buckets. I don't know if I'm expressing that clearly, but it's fun.
Say a few words about how the campaigns use.
Wow. Boy, if you want to know what the future is, you look at the campaigns, particularly, as you know, not a partisan comment again, but the Obama campaign was amazing. But you see, by combining survey research, and the Joel Benenson, who was the lead survey researcher for Obama, they would be calling 4,000 or 5,000 people a night. And then they would be targeting in their polling, not just simply the nation as a whole, but targeting key metro areas or key precincts and getting a read from them, but then combining those, in the old days, we had Claritas, the kinds of zip code surveys that have been done, combined with magazine subscriptions, newspaper readership, softer qualitative data, values orientation, and putting those bits and pieces of data together to get not only an aggregate profile in area code 13413 or a census tract, or even after you've accumulated so much down to the block level, but right down to John Smith. And being able then to generate from that a targeted letter to John Smith that has gotten to the point where it's almost scary. You have a sense that there's a drone outside. But this is the new world, maybe even not so new. We just sort of wonder what's next. Well, the brainwave technology is next, and the application of that to campaign politics. Joanne's saying, a whole new field here. Wow. Yep.
What do you think about the emergence and the role being played by those who are aggregating the numbers within pollsters?
I think it's interesting. I mean, obviously I'm biased because we're the ones that we have to do the hard work, and generate the data. But I think that it's understandable and it's a good thing. You know, I remember when there was Gallup, Harris, the networks, and then me. And then I'm sort of like at the tail end of the old era, and then into the new era. You know, instead of having 6 or 7 public polls out there, this last time around there were 32 that were doing daily tracking. And you always tell people, be good consumers of polls. You know, watch the outlier. But I watch the averages. But on the other hand, I also don't think that they're God. Because, you know, Real Clear Politics, for example, that's one, I read that one faithfully. They aggregate polls. But you have to be very careful, because in that mix, they may have a poll that was conducted 10 days earlier, in the mix with one that was conducted 1, 2, or 3 days. And, you know, lots of things can happen. The other thing is you have to pay attention to the outlier. You know, that's just simple statistics. You know, you're watching a clustering of polls, and then you got this one over here, and you're just putting it into the average. I also don't like, to be very honest with you, and this is a factor of age, I don't like some of the disrespect that I see of some of the younger aggregators who, you know, essentially may have formulas that they've developed looking at pollsters over the years, but I happen to know that they pick and choose the data that they put in, and that there are personal biases that are used, and then ultimately these are poker players. There's you know, I am in a public dispute with Nate Silver, who 538 blog, the New York Times, you know, and to go on television or write in his blog, Obama is going to win. He's got a 71% chance of winning. You know, we're still polling human beings, and anything can happen. And so you really, you know, can't pretend that you're God. I tried that. Yes?
If the young people, the 18 to 29-year-old, a major voting bloc, how will that affect 4 years from now if Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden will be in their 70s?
Well, there's, give or take, there's 71 million millennials. There's 78 million baby boomers. That's going to be very, very interesting in and of itself. Let me just dispose of the Hillary thing right here. I'm always asked about her. She will be president for 2 terms. She'll convert to Catholicism, and then she'll be Pope afterwards. So let's just put that one aside. You know, there are 2 political playbooks. There are we mortals, and then there's Bill and Hillary Clinton. So they win. But I think that, you know, when Bob Dole ran at the age of 73, he was just deemed too old. His time had come and gone. When John McCain ran, there were other factors, but age was not a factor. We'd had a demographic shift the other way as well. And then this time around with Joe Biden, next time around a 73-year-old Joe Biden. When you think of baby boomers who 4 years from now are going to be anywhere from their late 50s into, you know, their early 70s, what's a 73-year-old who looks, you know, tall, tanned, robust? That's what we aspire to. And so baby boomers, this is just one of those cocktail party facts that you can use. We're going to be the first age cohort that will have 1 million of us reach the age of 100. So let's see, you know, how that fits into the mix. So far, we're just beginning to see a generation gap, and it's based on the deficit. But it still is nowhere near what the generation gap was when I was growing up, baby boomers versus what we now call the greatest generation. There was a whole values divide and shift and distrust anyone over 30 and all of that. I'm not seeing that yet, except in a small way. Yes, Christina.
All very interesting. Too many questions. I'm curious if you could comment some more on identifying those different significant groups, the way that for the United States population you identify the creative class and youth. And perhaps we could link it to those cohorts' use of social media and communications themselves. In other countries, when you're polling other landscapes, do you see similar population clusters forming, and does their use of social media, their use of communications technology, play a role in forming demographic groups in the first place?
18% of 18 to 29-year-old Egyptians, Jordanians, Lebanese say, I'm a citizen of the planet Earth. That's revolutionary, you know. Latin Americans as well. And admittedly, we're not going out into the, you know, illiterate, basically rural hinterlands. You know, we're doing more cosmopolitan areas. The other thing is, by way of answering your question, this is one of the things that makes our field dynamic. One of the things I've been working on for the last 2 years, and actually will start publishing more and more on it, is what I call tribal analytics, where we've developed 9 open-ended questions about aspirations, what's most important to you, what's most important to you in terms of how you select the people you want to associate with, what's the motto that describes your life, what would you call your tribe, those sorts of things. And then we take the results of the analysis of those open-ended questions and then develop a quantitative survey and come up with what I call neo-tribes. So right now, here in the US, we have the God Squad. You know, whether Muslim or Protestant or Catholic or Jewish, there are those who faith is all. And that determines and motivates their lives. They're the happy hedonists, much smaller group, but those are the ones that fantasize about driving a Maserati, where the God Squad are happy with their own car. I can go on and on and on, but I like to do open-ended survey research, and that's all going to be expedited by the use of social media, because then what we can do is turn around and validate those responses by getting actual emotive language from people talking about their aspirations. That's kind of like the short view. Thank you very much.
So one of the things that John and his wife Kathy did for SUNYIT just recently, they established 2 scholarships, one in nursing and health professions, and one in computer science in honor of his longtime colleague. So you know, we thank John and Kathy for their continued contribution and ties with SUNYIT community. In recognition of his talk today, I would like to present on behalf of SUNYIT President's Lecture Series medallion.
Nice.
Has John Zogby President's Lecture Series and on the 3rd installment. So.
Oh, thank you. That's very nice.
Thank you. So I am very glad that all of you came to share with us, listening to John. Just so that you know, just a little plug-in for SUNYIT and our programs. You may know that we have recently launched data analysis certificate program, which ties in with a lot of the work that Zogby Analytics and the work that gets done in the polling industry. Also, applied math and our computer science as a program in cybersecurity, both at the undergraduate and graduate levels. And our math, science, and engineering program and our humanities program in communications, they all sort of kind of merged to forming really useful and interesting results that John has already talked about today. There will be a couple more installments of President's Lecture Series coming up. One will be just in a couple of weeks on robotics. We have a very successful program here at SUNYIT, Future Lego League, as some of you might have seen, our youngsters coming in to designing robots for using Lego pieces, and they program and all those fun things. Well, we'll have a next President's Lecture Series will be dealing with the topics of robotics at a very successful campus in Massachusetts. And then the one after that will be, we decided to merge science and cognition. So there's a professor from Rensselaer Polytechnic out in Troy who'll be talking about cybersecurity and cognition. So we're gonna try to hit as many of these really interesting fields. You know, we started out this year with nanotechnology as the first topic of our conversation. And then we have had some really heavy-duty mathematics with a lot of integrals and differential equations flying around. And now with Dr. Zogby giving us an interesting political twist and in the tectonic environment. And so the next one is robotics, and after that we're going to deal with cybersecurity and cognition. So with that, I'd like to close today's President's Lecture Series, and I invite all of you for the next installment of President's Lecture Series. Thank you.